Thank you, Glenn. Good afternoon, everyone. As Glenn said, I'm Andrew Cameron from WSP, Parsons Brinckerhoff. I'm Director of Urban Design at our practice. I'm also a transport planner, and I'm quite passionate about streets. As Glenn said, I'm going to talk a little bit today about some reasons why I think we need to care for our streets in all our cities, but also what people are doing around the country, around the world, in terms of making those streets actually wonderful. I think charm was the word we heard earlier. But here we go, the persistent street. Streets have a habit of hanging around. Once we set out the layout of streets in a town or city, they're a bit like glue. They tend to stay there for a long time. And if you like the glue analogy, they're the stuff that actually holds our communities together. If we design poor streets, then the communities are divided. If we design good streets, they're joined. More of that later. And we can take any city. Here's Copenhagen from 500 years ago. The street pattern hasn't changed because once it's laid down, it stays. They didn't make their streets wider. They just put everyone on bicycles instead of building bigger and bigger roads. Here's my hometown in Newark-on-Trent. The marketplace and the streets that lead to it haven't changed for about 4.5 centuries. This was it in the late 18th century. We used to hang people there. We stopped that recently, and this is what it looks like now. But it's still the place where everyone meets, where the market is. That street pattern hasn't changed at all. What has changed are the buildings, apart from this one, which is a 14th century building which somehow hung on. Everything else gets changed. So that's why streets are important. They hang about for a long time, and we've got to care for them. And we need to know what the difference is between streets and roads. And I would suggest we need to build streets rather than roads. We've had for a century and a half now a profession of designing streets for vehicles. We started off in the new town in Edinburgh, where the dimension of the main streets was sort of 6-horse carriage could only take a U-turn. And ever since, we've had more of these things on our roads, and hence we design more and more for motor vehicles. But there's change afoot, and the government has produced 2 documents, Manual for Streets 1 and 2. I helped write these, first one in 2007, really to bring a change in thinking about how we care for our streets and to restrike that balance, going away from vehicle-dominated places, back to streets for people, for human beings, and as part of that obviously is the greening of those streets to make them pleasant environments to be in. And one of the things we did in the guidance was try and set out a way to think about streets and roads. And it was this idea that a street needs to have 2 principal functions. One is to do with movement. Yes, it's got to move people around by car, by bus, by cycle, or walking. But also it needs to be a place. And that place element is equally as important. And if we just think about movement, we get these. We get expressways, distributors, collectors, heavy trafficked arterials, those sort of things. But actually we should be trying to build these things. Lanes, streets, avenues, boulevards. They've all got a human component. And that gives us the difference between building a road and building a street. Just a couple of quick examples. This is a road. This actually divides the communities either side of it. It's fast, 60 miles an hour, and you can drive faster in this particular case. But that bit of tarmac from curb to curb could be treated very differently. Same dimension of tarmac here. Here's what I call a street. It actually doesn't divide the communities, it brings them together. It's not actually wide enough for 2 cars to get past. But that's fine because everyone has to slow down and they have to flash their lights or wave to the other driver when they get past each other. And sure enough, this actually carries more traffic than this particular example. And if you're going to have an accident here and you hit a pedestrian at 60 or 50 miles an hour, the chances are they're going to be killed. But if you hit a pedestrian here at 15 miles an hour, the chances are far that they will survive. So perhaps there's that balance to be struck. And it's not just smaller streets, in small communities that these are, right up to bigger streets. Here's Abu Dhabi, where we also helped write the Abu Dhabi Street Design Manual. This isn't one of the ones we built, but they built monster streets and everyone drives faster and faster. It doesn't have much of a place element, but why not take, again, the same number of lanes and think about a great boulevard, a great Parisian boulevard, which is a wonderful place to be at the same time. It has a high traffic capacity at low traffic speed, and actually has the highest rental values and commercial values in the city with the most traffic. So we can have both, but we've got to get the design right. And of course, what's great about this, what makes it a boulevard, are the trees. That's key to making it a fantastic space to be. So it is about human scale, thinking about human beings. not the kind of monster, highway scale. This is London, where the pedestrians are shoved underneath. Cities are starting to think differently. This is what highway engineers do when they come back from the pub on a Friday afternoon. They dream up bigger and bigger schemes. But we're saying, no, this isn't right in our urban centres. We need to build places that are human scale. And cities are changing. On the left, Maid Marian Way in Nottingham, built in the 60s, elevated roundabout, pedestrian underpasses, now been taken out, and it's this. It's a crossroads in the city. The pedestrian routes are straight across. This still carries 40,000 vehicles a day, still the same amount of traffic, but a different form that reconnects the city back to its hinterland on a major route into the city centre. And not all these examples are directly relevant to Cambridge, but I'm trying to give you a flavour of some of the ways that people are approaching these principles and doing it differently. Here's Birmingham, knocking down the infrastructure they had from the 1960s. This is the same street now. Again, incredibly heavily trafficked, but not high speed, but planted with new trees, which are now maturing, and an ease of crossing the road with a median down the middle. This is Taunton in Somerset, smaller scale, but they decided to redo the place around the War Memorial a few years ago. This is arguably the most important place in the town. So they took away the guard railing, they put in some better crossings for pedestrians, they put in granite sets so people can cross where they want. They didn't put in keep left bollards because they're ugly, you don't need them. They didn't put in black and white chevrons on the roundabout because they're ugly, you don't need them. And they made it into a much more humane place. And this is 15,000 vehicles a day, still very busy. So quality streets, I think that's what we want. I'm sure we're going to have some at Christmas to eat, but how do we get some in the city? A lot of it is about how we allocate that space. We're working within an existing environment. There is only a certain dimension to work with. How is that space allocated? With new places, this is what I help design. It's easier because we can determine the widths that we want, and when we put in trees, they're coordinated with utilities and services, so there isn't a conflict. So it's easier for dealing with the new. But if we're dealing with existing, it's harder, unless we've got a wide space, like Marlborough in here, incredibly wide dimension, and plenty of space to play with. Equally, back in Newark, enough space to have two cycle lanes, one on the road, one on the footpath, because the main road is so wide. And the same in Oxford. There's plenty of room to have adequate cycle lanes here. Although note this cycle lane is only about a metre wide. Is that adequate? Seems to work well in Oxford. And I think the question of dimensions for some of these pieces of infrastructure should be queried. Do we need a 2-metre cycle lane? Can we make them a little bit smaller? And on the trade-off, we actually retain trees or put new trees in. They've done it in Liverpool, major arterial into the city called Edge Lane, and again they've planted with new trees. A lot of the existing trees they had were actually of poor quality, so they've developed a very strong planting regime to bring a new boulevard effect to that street, trees down the middle and trees along the edges, and that's what they did there to make it look a lot better. Not just trees, but clearly the grass that we see on verges. Can that be retained in places? Can it actually have other functions? A scheme I did where we made the grass spaces actually part of the drainage system. So these fill up a couple of times a year with water when it rains, and the kids play in them because it's muddy and they love it. So why can't we think about that being part of the design of our streets as well? Here's another one in the same scheme. Smaller scale, more urban, again, these sort of things, they're there, they've got a purpose in terms of taking the water away, but they also add to the greenness of those spaces and help with environmental considerations as well. In London, there's been different approaches. Kensington High Street, several years old now, with a scheme to remove clutter and guard railing, with some tree planting down the middle, cycle planting down the middle. Doing all those kind of unsafe things actually reduced pedestrian accidents by 70% in the street by letting people cross where they want. Speeds are down, but no cycle lanes. The cyclists all travel on parallel routes. They didn't put cycle lanes along that main street. But here it is, they kept some of the mature trees, some of them went because they were poor quality and were replaced. Same in Walworth Road, similar scheme with a median down the middle, done on a budget compared to High Street Kensington. But actually they changed the perception for pedestrians. At all the junctions, like here, pedestrians have a level journey on the footpath. So every side road, the car has to stop and turn over the footpath where the pedestrian gets to go straight all the time. Is that something to consider here? Resetting the balance in terms of who's king within the street. Same on the Strand, a small medium, but enough to let people cross. Note again, no cycle lanes, people travel on parallel systems rather than use that space for cycling on the main route. Of course, people can still cycle here. I did it the other day within the bus lane. New Malden, smaller scale, south of London. Nice little scheme to reduce the carriageway width, again to make it a little bit easier to cross with this flush median down the middle, lighting down the middle to narrow this space, and new trees to green this space. But a word of caution, that the road safety auditor turned up at the end and said, actually we should put some white lines down here just to make it a bit safer. We should have some bollards and some white lines here, and we'll put a keep left sign under the lights here, and it's going to be illuminated even though it's under the lights, and cars have had headlamps for a century. And all this stuff gets added in, and it costs money, and it makes the scheme look poorer. So word of caution, you don't necessarily need all this. Malden did a great job. They just nicked the idea from here, from Hennef in Germany, exactly the same columns, but the Germans don't have to keep right signs or white lines and all that, they just keep it really simple. So that's another message there. Less is more when it comes to the detail. And then just three more to wrap up on, again, internationally, but allocating that space on some of the main routes. This is Copenhagen, and they've actually squeezed the bus lanes here. This bus lane is only about 2 metres wide, and that's to get a cycle lane in and a small medium. They thought that was important to let people cross. So it's that trade-off. You can do the do maximum, but do you lose shop fronts and trees and what have you? But is there a way to balance it slightly better? This is Stockholm. Similar thing, they actually squeezed the cycle lanes at under a metre, but a tiny medium. It's only 300 millimetres wide, but enough to step onto to be able to cross. And different ways of thinking. This is Rome with putting the cycle lane together, but it's not a standard size for two-way, but it's big enough for two people to get past each other. Again, compromise, balance within those spaces on the street. So that's a bit of a whirlwind tour of some thoughts on how we start to allocate space, what other people are doing in the streets. I'm going to hand back to Glenn now, who's going to continue.